Hello and welcome. Thank you for participating in Morehead at Home Skywatching, hosted by Morehead Planetarium and Science Center. My name is Amy Sale, and I'm an educator at Morehead. We are a unit of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, located on campus. We also work throughout the state through a number of outreach initiatives like our summer camp programs, our mobile lab vans, and the annual North Carolina Science Festival. Our mission is to help people better understand science, technology, and health, and we do this through offering engaging learning opportunities like this live virtual event. We're happy to have you here today to learn about Pluto, my favorite former planet. And my colleague Nick will get us started.
Thanks so much, Amy, and welcome everybody to Morehead at Home. I'm Nick Eakes. I work at the Morehead Planetarium and Science Center as an astronomy educator, and we're excited you're with us today. So if you're watching live from North Carolina, I know your skies might be kind of rainy right now, but if you're watching from somewhere else in the United States, I hope you have clear skies. As Amy mentioned, we are going to dive into a hotly contested topic, probably one of the things we get asked about the most at the planetarium, the object Pluto. A couple of housekeeping things before we dive into it. If you have questions throughout this session, we want to hear from you. But the way we're going to hear from you is by looking in the question and answer box. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen there, you should have a text box that says Q&A. If you have any questions throughout the session, just pop them in there. And then after we present some content, we'll take some time to answer some of those questions. So be thinking if you have something about Pluto or something else in the solar system that you're interested in. We're going to be using a couple of different types of visualizations during our show today. And I'll discuss them a little bit as we pull them up on the screen, but I wanted to let you know that both of these softwares are free for you to use on your own home computer. They're called Stellarium, which is kind of like a flat screen planetarium, and NASA's Eyes, which is a simulation of how NASA views objects in space. So I'll talk about those a little more as we get into it, but we want you to be able to follow along and maybe even try some of this stuff yourself after our session today. So on to our friend Pluto. Like I said, it's one of the things we get asked about the most. So today we're going to try our best to tell you the story of Pluto, both how you see it, maybe how you can't see it, what happened to it back in 2006, and what we know about it now. So hopefully after today, you'll have a good overview of what Pluto is and why we still love it, even though things might change. So we have a poll question for you to start off before we start showing you some things on the screen. And it should pop up on your screen right now. It says true or false. Pluto is the only object in our solar system that used to be considered a planet. So you might know that that's kind of the contentious thing about Pluto, is that we call it something different now than we used to. So we wanted to get your ideas on whether this statement is true or false. So we'll give you just a moment to check that out, and we'll see what we say. Has this happened before? Has any other object ever been reclassified? We'll give you just another moment to answer. I know our brains are waking up this morning. We'll see what everybody has to say. I don't know, Amy, what do you think?
Oh gosh, I think we're going to find out the answer. And by the way, while we're waiting for the poll answers to be displayed, I'm taking a peek at the Q&A and I see a couple of good questions already. We are definitely going to answer these questions. Why is Pluto a dwarf planet? And can you see Pluto in the sky? Okay, so I think we're about to get the answers to the poll. Let's see what you all said. Okay. Nick, it looks like more than half the people thought that maybe Pluto is the only former planet in our solar system.
Yeah, it's a pretty good split. Yeah, a little over half of you said true, and a little under half of you said false. So what's the deal, Amy? What's the real answer?
Well, it turns out there are other things in our solar system that have been known as planets in the past. So the word planet comes from a Greek term that means wandering star or wanderer. The Greeks, among others, noticed that there are actually 7 objects that seem to wander against the background of the stars. 5 things that you probably think of as planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Also, they noticed that the sun and our moon appear to move against the background of the stars, but you would not call Earth's moon and the sun planets anymore. There's also some other objects that used to be known as planets. We'll get to them in a little bit. But Nick, I wonder if we could take a look at the sky. I know it's for North Carolina, at least right now, it's cloudy in reality, but we can do a little planetarium magic by using stellarium.
Let's do it. Our stellarium sky is never cloudy. And you should be seeing it on your screen now. Just if this is your first time joining us, this might look a little funny to you. You notice that we have a kind of round view of the sky with the ocean down here at the bottom. That's because for what we're about to do, we need to be able to see the horizon, which is where the sky meets the ground. And you'll see why in just a moment. But imagine that this area right here is kind of like the top of your sky. So if you were out in your backyard or something like that, this would be straight above you. And you notice that we have some big red letters, our cardinal points that can tell us which direction we're facing. So this is a southern view. But let's move time forward. In the real world, we have to wait for every second to go by in order to do this. But in stellarium, we can speed up the clock.
And I noticed that the two of those wanderers, the sun and the moon, are actually in the sky right now. Although those of you watching from North Carolina, you're probably just seeing clouds if you look up at the sky, if you look out your window right now.
So we're going to move to just after sunset. So keep your eyes on our star as our Earth rotates and it appears to dip below that horizon. You might see a couple of other objects pop up on your screen. Okay. I'm going to pause us right here because you notice, if you can see my clock down here, this is a little bit before 9 p.m. tonight. So it says 20:48. That means 8:48 p.m. You might notice something in the western sky. What are those, Amy?
Those are two planets, Venus and Mercury. So 3 planet finding rules. Planets tend to be bright, Venus in particular. Planets tend to shine steadily rather than twinkling like stars. And then also, as I've already alluded to, planets move against the background of the stars. If you keep looking night after night after night, you'll notice, for example, that Venus looks like it's kind of taking a dive towards the sun. So if you haven't seen Venus, on the next clear night, definitely go look right after sunset because we're going to lose it from the evening sky later this month. But there's more planets in the sky. Nick, I wonder if we could stay up maybe later and pick up 3 of those other planets that were known to ancient people because you can see them with just your eyes.
Sure thing. You might notice that it looks like lots of things are zipping across our sky. Those are very likely satellites. So on a clear night, sometimes you can see these objects orbiting around our Earth. But now you're even noticing 3 more objects with labels rising in the eastern sky. So as Amy mentioned, these are 3 more planets. None of these is Pluto, but all 3 of these have interesting features, both on their surfaces and in their history. And you notice that they all kind of appear in this early morning sky. So if you're an early riser and it ever clears up out there, you can probably get a look at these 3, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars.
And somebody asked, James asked, can you see Pluto in the sky? And in fact, no, you can't. And that's why it wasn't known to ancient people. You need a telescope, and you need a good telescope to see it. And so, Nick, I wonder why we can't see Pluto.
It is just so far away from our sun. And even though it does reflect a little bit of sunlight, if I were to try to find it here in our stellarium sky, I couldn't even pick it out. So luckily we have a tool, which is our handy dandy search window. We can try to find Pluto that way. I brought that up using the key F3. So if you ever wanted to try that yourself, you could give that a shot. But you notice I type in Pluto, it says the object is right here. Let's see where it would be. You notice our view shifts a little bit, but we have some information that comes up over here all about our friend Pluto. And you notice it's in the same direction as Jupiter and Saturn. So what do you think, Amy? Should we zoom in on it? See if we can get closer?
Let's take a look. And it might look that Pluto's practically on top of Jupiter. Jupiter's closer to us than Pluto. Pluto is billions of miles away from us. And look at that. It's got moons as well. It has 5 moons. And I don't know, Nick, maybe we should talk about how Pluto got discovered.
Sure.
So let's mention the 5 that we've already talked about: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Those have always been known because you can look up and see them. You don't need binoculars, you don't need a telescope. You can look up and you can see them. You can tell that they're planets because they appear to move against the background of the stars if you keep looking from night to night. It wasn't until the year 1781 that the planet Uranus was discovered. It was discovered by William Herschel. He wasn't sure that it was a planet at first, actually, and it almost didn't end up with that name Uranus, which is like named after the Greek god of the sky. He thought it might be clever to name it after King George III, or the so-called Georgian star. So, you know, we almost ended up with a planet George, which would have been kind of strange. And then the next planet discovered was Neptune in 1846, named after the Roman god of the sea. And then, but there's another planet that you might not have learned about in school. Nick, I didn't learn about this one in school, Planet Ceres.
Neither did I.
Yeah, did you? Yeah, no. But if you had lived in the 1800s, you might have learned about it. Ceres is not visible to the unaided eye, and I think Nick is going to try to actually show us where it is. We now know it as the largest object in the asteroid belt. A belt of objects between Mars and Jupiter. But when it was discovered on New Year's Day in 1801, Ceres was called a planet. And it's now known that it's one of many objects in this whole belt of objects. And some of those other objects like Vesta and Juno, they were also known as planets when they were first discovered. So this planet demotion thing that happened to Pluto, it has happened before. So Pluto, we can talk more about Ceres later if you all want to, just type in questions in the Q&A, but let's go back to Pluto's discovery. It was discovered by a young guy. He was only 24 years old, Clyde Tombaugh, in the year 1930. So 90 years ago, he was working at the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, and he was studying photographs of the sky and noticed that there was something that had moved against the background of the stars in 2 different photographs taken on 2 different days, and that was Pluto. It was called a planet right away. Somebody asked in the Q&A how it got its name. The name was actually suggested by an 11-year-old English girl, and her grandfather forwarded the name Pluto. Pluto is named for the Roman god of the underworld, and forwarded that name to Lowell Observatory, and anyway, it ended up getting picked. And what Nick has just showed us here is before we had a spacecraft fly by Pluto, this was actually the best images we had of Pluto taken by the Hubble Space Telescope. And these are very highly processed images. It took a lot of work to produce what really looks like a blurry blob to me.
Yeah, it's not just your computer screens. These images are very, very blurry. And you know, it might be a little bit more detail than we saw on our stellarium screen, but it was really hard to know what was going on with Pluto before we got close to it.
Yeah, so we know that there's several questions in the Q&A about why isn't Pluto considered a planet anymore. So 1930, when it was discovered, it was considered a planet. And then in 2006, the International Astronomical Union got together and had a meeting. And it was very contentious when it happened. It's really entertaining to read newspaper headlines from around that time. But they came up with 3 rules, 3 criteria, and you had to meet them all to be a planet. Number 1, you have to orbit the sun. So Nick, what do you think? Pluto orbits the sun, right?
Even though it's really far away, it does still orbit the sun.
Yeah, okay, so no problem there. Pluto meets that planet test. But then number 2, the IAU said, you have to have achieved hydrostatic equilibrium, which is a fancy way of saying you got to have enough mass, enough stuff to have pulled yourself into a nearly round shape. So everybody look at your screen right now, the images of Pluto taken by the Hubble Space Telescope. What do you think? Does Pluto meet that test? Is it round? Nick's nodding. He thinks yes. Okay, number 3, and this is where Pluto fails. The IAU said, you want to be a planet, you have to be a bully. You have to be a gravitational bully. When you orbit the sun, you can't be orbiting with a whole bunch of friends. And it turns out that Pluto is just one object within a whole belt of objects called the Kuiper belt. So just like Ceres, another former planet, is one object in a whole belt of objects, in that case called the asteroid belt, Pluto too is one object, one icy object, and many, many, many icy objects way out there in the solar system. And so it fails the planet test, and it's now called a dwarf planet.
Yeah, and I know that can kind of make some of us sad. We really wish Pluto was part of the Planet Club, but it's a pretty good thing that it got recategorized, because we would have to memorize lots and lots of planets if we considered everything that's like Pluto to also be a planet. So there's a reason, but it is a human reason. You know, this group of humans decided how we wanted to categorize these objects. So don't worry, it didn't blow up or anything like that. We just call it something different now.
All right, and I think we have, everybody get ready. I think we have another question for you all. Have humans ever been to Pluto? What do you all think? Yes or no? So go ahead.
I will say there might be some interesting answers to this one. Remember, Pluto is very, very far away, but we did mention that we now have better images of it. Let's see what you think. Have humans ever been to Pluto? I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that even if I were an astronaut, I would sign up for the trip to Pluto. It would probably take a pretty brave astronaut to take that trip.
Yeah, it's also really cold out there. So, you know, bring some good long underwear if you decide to go. Probably a really good spacesuit too. Okay, last chance. And I think the poll will go away and we'll take a look. So most of you all said no. A few of you all said yes. And I don't know, Nick, I think in a way, either answer could be right, depending on how you think about it.
Yeah, I think this is kind of an everybody wins question, because human beings physically, like astronauts, have not been all the way out to Pluto. So most of you are correct. But human beings have sent things to get closer to Pluto. In particular, the New Horizons spacecraft. So we've sent robotic spacecraft out there to survey Pluto and give us more information about it. So in a way, that's kind of like humans going there, because these robots are kind of like our eyes and ears. So that's actually a really good transition. I want to show you a little bit about this robot, New Horizons. And to do that, I'm going to use a program that some of you might have seen last time around called NASA's EYES. And we're going to actually go along with the New Horizons spacecraft on a flyby. So as we do this flyby, depending on how my internet connection works and how yours works, you might see a little bit of funny movement and things like that. But our goal here is to get close to Pluto and then give you a better up-close view of the dwarf planet itself. So I'm going to share my window. I have to adjust it just a little bit here for us. And I will do a little bit of explaining what we are seeing here on the screen. So up here in the corner, it tells us this is NASA's EYES on the solar system, produced by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and Caltech. It's a really, really neat tool because we can simulate how these spacecraft that are still out there in space, how they performed and what they looked at years ago. So you might even notice here at the bottom of your screen, I have the current time set to July 13th, 2015. And that's not a mistake. I know it's 2020 right now, but we are going back in time to see how New Horizons, the spacecraft right here, flew by Pluto. A couple of other things. I set us at a distance that's about 250,000 miles. That's useful to us because this is about as far as the moon is from our Earth. So where the spacecraft is right now is about Earth to moon distance away from Pluto. We are riding along with it. Right now, our time is paused but I want you to see how that changes. And you might notice some of these kind of funny lines and this box up here. This is showing what the spacecraft, what its eyes are seeing, for lack of a better term. It has all these really fun instruments on it that study things as it flies by them. So right now our target is Pluto, but as I hit play here, you're going to notice that that changes. So all that being said, I think it's time for a flyby. We don't want to go backwards. We want to go forwards. So I'm going to send us about 30 minutes per second. You're going to notice it looks like we get closer and closer to Pluto. The spacecraft is moving around, targeting all sorts of things, including Earth. I'm going to slow us down to 10 minutes per second just so we can really see this flyby. You also notice that the target changes here. So it's actually taking images of the moons of Pluto. It's turning around and looking back at our Earth. It does all sorts of things, but here on July 14th, you notice we're gonna fly right by our favorite dwarf planet. It did not land on its surface, but you see those cameras started taking all sorts of interesting images, and it just kept on flying out into space. That might seem kind of sad, like, oh, just a short flyby. Well, New Horizons has also done lots of imaging of other objects, but I think we can probably get a better view of how those images from New Horizons look to us in a different way. So instead of rewinding and taking our flyby back, I'm actually going to exit. And this is going to give us a totally different view of the sky. As I'm setting this up, are there any other cool things that New Horizons has done that you'd like to share, Amy?
Yeah, I also wanted to mention it takes so long to get to Pluto that when this spacecraft launched, Pluto was still considered a planet. It launched in early 2006 before Pluto's reclassification, and then didn't get there for 9.5 years. And this was the fastest spacecraft ever launched also. It tells you something about how far away Pluto is. Well, it's kept going. The mission for New Horizons is still going on. It actually flew by another Kuiper Belt object called Arrokoth on January 1st, 2019. And Arrokoth is really interesting. It looks sort of like a really lumpy potato or maybe a squashed snowman. Oh, and Nick is bringing up an image of Pluto. And oh, I see an interesting shape. And somebody mentioned this in the Q&A, wondering about that heart shape. It might be a little bit hard to see, but it looks like Pluto loves us. It's a nitrogen glacier, by the way. Somebody asked what it was made of.
So one thing you guys might notice as you're watching this image is a lot clearer than what we saw in Stellarium. It's a lot clearer than what the Hubble Space Telescope showed us, even though it's an amazing machine. This flyby gave us a really, really good view. And I know this says artistic rendition estimated from data, but that's how we see images from space. We take data and then we're able to put our pictures together. So all that being said, I think we still give Pluto lots of love. And as Amy mentioned, this heart shape here gives us a little bit of love back. If I swing around the back of Pluto, you notice there are parts of it that are still blurry because even though that flyby gave us a lot of information, it didn't get to survey quite everything. So maybe another future Pluto mission could be in the works someday. I don't know. I think that would be kind of fun. Okay, well, we want to be able to get to some of y'all's questions, but we have one last poll question for you before we start talking about your questions, and we're going to pop it up here on the screen. I think the coolest question of them all: do you think that Pluto should be called a planet? We told you some of its history. We told you the rules for what it takes to be a planet. We showed you a few different images of how Pluto looks up close. So what do you think? Do we go back to pre-2006 and call it a planet and learn about 9 planets? Or do we stick with our 8 planets and a whole new interesting set of objects called dwarf planets? This is an opinion question, so just be honest.
Yeah, no right or wrong answer. It's what you think.
We'll give you just a moment. And I'm going to start looking at some of these questions that you guys have too.
Yeah, we've got lots of good ones. I don't know how we're going to get to them all, Nick.
We will try our best. Okay.
Let's see what you all think.
Wow. Okay. Looks like a pretty even split. Just about as close as you can get. But I think by a small margin, y'all think that Pluto should be called a planet. You know, I can't call the IAU for you and change the rules, but I always tell people if in your heart of hearts you want to call Pluto a planet, go for it. But also understand that there was a scientific decision as to why it got changed. So cool. I'm really happy to hear that from y'all. What I'll do is take away our image of Pluto there, and Amy and I are going to try to answer some of these fantastic questions.
Yeah, Nick, while you're looking, because you haven't had as much of a chance to look, let me tackle one from Patrick, who asks, is Pluto cold or hot? Well, Pluto is way out there from the sun, and it is actually quite cold. The temperature is nearly minus 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you should decide to take a vacation at Pluto, I really hope you'll bring a very good winter coat.
Well, that's a great question. Kind of on that same note, Mariah asked, what do the surfaces of Pluto and Ceres look and feel like? Some of those images that we showed you are kind of like our best look at how their surfaces look. But as Amy mentioned, we know that they have solid surfaces. We know that they're very, very cold. Other than that, I think we still have a lot to learn about exactly what types of rock, what types of ice, and things like that their surfaces are made of. And we're still getting more and more data from New Horizons. So even though it flew by years ago, we're still getting data about what the surface of Pluto is made of. So we're going to keep learning more and more. But I think the safe bet is to say it is really cold, and the way that you would move around would be very different than somewhere like our Earth.
Okay, and Nick, I see a question from Emily. How long does it take a signal to return from New Horizons to Earth? So that's an excellent question. So the spacecraft is way out there, billions of miles away. Now NASA on Earth can send signals to New Horizons, and signals can come back from New Horizons to Earth at light speed. But light travels really fast, but that spacecraft is really far away. So I'm gonna make a rough estimate, and Nick, if you know more specifically, please correct me, but roughly 5 hours for a signal to come back. And that's traveling at light speed.
Sounds about right to me.
Something on that order. Yeah, it rounds down to 5 hours at least. So great question. Oh, there's also one about how many dwarf planets are there from the Peterson family. There are 5 named dwarf planets: Pluto, Ceres, Eris, Haumea, and Makemake.
Yeah, great question. I see one that's kind of along those lines. I might have missed it. It was about how we name objects. So I heard that Amy just mentioned there are 5 named dwarf planets. Well, that group, the International Astronomical Union, gets the official say of what things are named, but a lot of times the public, us, we get a little bit of input. So sometimes when they find a new object or something like that, they'll ask other people what we want it to be called. Usually the names come from mythology, ancient stories, Greek and Roman mythology a lot of the time, but there are lots of exceptions to that as well. So I would encourage you, it's not just planets and dwarf planets and moons and things like that that get named. There are even craters and other things like that on the surface of objects that get named. So if you want to look in to how things are named and you love those type of stories, look up the IAU nomenclature system, and you'll learn a lot. I look at it every once in a while and learn a new thing every time.
And Nick, I see a question about what is the size of Pluto. So we had a pretty good idea before sending the New Horizons spacecraft, but that spacecraft nailed it down. 1,470 miles across, actually a little bit bigger than we had thought. And just for reference, 1,470 miles, that is smaller than Earth's moon, and that is smaller than the width of the United States. Pluto is pretty tiny.
But again, that size isn't quite why it got kicked out of the club. Remember that the way it interacts with those other objects out there was the big reason why we can't call it a planet, not just because it's small.
Okay, and then Mary asked, could there be more moons around Pluto? So there's 5 known moons. And in fact, 2 of them were discovered fairly recently. And so they kind of had to deal with that when the New Horizons spacecraft was on its way. And they thought that maybe the New Horizons spacecraft might discover more moons, but it did not turn out that way.
But it's possible that in the future we find more. You might hear sometimes about Jupiter and Saturn's moons and how we can never really nail down a really specific number. That's not because they're just popping out of thin air. It's because some of them are hard to image, and over time we get a better picture of how things orbit around objects like planets and dwarf planets. Okay, there are so many fantastic questions here that I think we would love to get to, but it looks like we're just about out of time. So thank you for all of your fantastic questions, and thank you for joining us today. I hope you had fun. I hope it kind of demystified some things about Pluto for you, and I hope you're interested in learning a little bit more. If you want to get more information about what Morehead Planetarium and Science Center is doing during this time, please visit our website, which is www.moreheadplanetarium.org, and look for Morehead at Home. There's a whole big list of things that we have going on, including these sessions that happen on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 a.m. If you want to follow us on social media, you can do that through our Twitter, which is at Morehead Planet, or Instagram or Facebook at Morehead Planetarium. And we have a YouTube channel too. Please go on our YouTube channel and check out our virtual playlists. We have 360 planetarium shows, and these sessions that we've been doing are recorded if you ever want to go back and watch those again. So we miss you. We wish we could see you in our big planetarium dome right now, but we appreciate you being safe at home, and maybe we'll see you next Thursday morning.
Bye, everybody.
See you later.